Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And we've seen Apocalypse Now, the final cut. It's the second sort of redone, re-released version of Apocalypse Now. 40 years old. Came out in 1979 originally.
And I saw it when it first came out.
Because you're old.
Because I'm old.
Because you're as old as Lawrence Fishburne.
I am.
You were 17 at the time.
That's right.
And in 2001, it was re-released as Apocalypse Now Redux, which included 49 minutes of material that wasn't in the original cut.
Yes.
Which was, I don't know exactly the details, but largely there was this French plantation scene, or sequence, or kind of set of scenes, that were not in the original. So you watching this one, were going, what's going on here?
I also saw the Redux one.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. So I've seen this several times now. I've seen all versions. But the way that memory works, I mean, unless we saw all the versions, side by side, I just can't remember, what was in the Redux and what was, in the... But what I did remember is I didn't remember anything about the French plantation. So, that was kind of... That took me by surprise. This time around, though I'm sure probably there were sections of it in the Redux one, but I'd somehow erased it from memory, which is interesting. And the other thing that struck me, watching it again, and again, maybe it's memory playing tricks on you, but I didn't realize that the Marlon Brando part was so short. And I think maybe when you add 49 minutes, it changes the balance because he seemed to occupy a much larger role in my memory of the original anyway than his allotted screen time does here. Though of course he's set up from the very beginning. It's a search for him. You see pictures of him, and all of that. But it did strike me how little screen time he had.
Well, this version is shorter than the Redux. About 20 minutes of footage has been cut from the Redux. So this version is 3 hours pretty much on the mark. It started at 1:52 and it finished at 4:40 something. So a little bit less than 3 hours. I think they're including credits and stuff in that number.
Did it feel long to you?
I mean, it did. You could tell it's a big old movie, and it moves kind of slowly, I suppose. But
it didn't to me.
Didn't move slowly.
No, I looked at my watch only once, and that was not because I was bored or anything. It was more to get a sense of how much time there was left, if you know what I mean.
I did the same thing, and for the same reason. I didn't check my watch to see, going, oh god, this is going on a bit. But I just wanted to get a sense of where the film was. Yeah. I'd never seen it before. You've seen it a number of times.
Yes. I think this is probably only my fourth time, because, I mean, there are films that you study properly and you watch 20, 30, 40 times. This one I haven't, right? Like, I have just seen it, like, maybe, 4 times or something.
I'm aware of its reputation, though, and I'm aware of sort of the parts of it that have become sort of canonically, sort of cultural sort of icons, the ride of the Valkyries in the helicopters, the use of the doors at the start and end, the horror, everything that Brando sort of gets up to, and the general and also the thing of it being based on Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, a novel from the early 1900s, I think, maybe late 1800s.
Can we pause a little bit just to talk about those opening sequences and the Valkyrie sequence and so on,
Yeah.
I don't know, the first half hour or so. Because, one of the things that has changed for me is just, I know how to see films better and how to see films in different ways, right? And one of the things that I just found absolutely gobsmackingly great watching it this time around was just those sequences. And actually almost, on a technical level alone, they're astonishing, right? Those helicopters, cows going up, fires spreading on the, on the sidelines, surfers, right? And you have like these big wide shots where there's all of these things being coordinated at the same time. And you just think, oh my God, this is just like a genius, really. Like, I found it absolutely gobsmackingly great.
Yeah, there's an incredible sort of orchestration of everything that's going on.
Yeah.
In that massive production.
Massive production. I mean, so much going on. Also, I think with a great narrative clarity, you know why you're looking at what and what the effect of it is supposed to be. But just the coordination of the various elements, I really, my jaw was open in a way that it hadn't been before. That you kind of, I don't know why. I think I just didn't appreciate those elements before, right? Like, it's the movies. Everything is possible in the movies when you're a 17-year-old, and not too highly educated visually. You just don't notice those things. But actually, I really was gobsmacked.
Yeah, it's kind of extraordinary, and it would be too much to say you don't see things like it these days, but you don't feel like you see things like it. You don't feel like you feel things like it. Like, I mean, obviously there was no CGI in those days and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Like everything being done for real. People do talk about, real stuff's better than CGI an awful lot, and I think too much. That it's kind of a fashionable thing to say. On the other hand, you can't deny the sort of the benefit of as you say, the scale, the feeling of the size of the production, everything, how extraordinary, sort of the as you say, sort of fires in the background. They're shooting at the right time of day, so all the light is perfect. Helicopters, people, explosions going off. Robert Duvall not moving.
Oh,
I mean, his performance. How do you not move when this explosion's going on?
I know, he's fantastic.
It's kind of amazing. Here's something that struck me, which is not the feeling that the film left you with at the end, because the tone really changes, but something that I was very surprised by in those early scenes is I did not expect the film to be as funny as it was.
Yeah.
There are real laughs, and it's a dark humour. It's a humour that comes out of absurdity of situation and character. Yeah. But, so for instance, Robert Duvall's character, who is this sort of 10-gallon hat wearing, sort of all-American sort of parody of, kind of kick-ass, we're going to go over there and fuck them up type sort of general. And, he orchestrates as well, so he plays Ride of the Valkyries on the helicopters to scare the Viet Cong coming in. Although there is an element of that where I thought, probably from that far away, they probably can't hear it. It's more for them in a way, like his theatrics. Yeah. And then in the middle of this attack, the napalm, and he's napalming this sort of beach, this little coastal village. He has people surfing. He says, if I say this beach is safe to surf, it's safe to surf.
I know. And there are bombs dropping all around the surfers.
Yeah.
Right.
And I couldn't quite work out why he was doing that. There was something about splitting them off left and right. I don't know exactly.
Well, the reason why is because the character played by Sam Bottoms is, one of the California surfing legends, and he wants him to surf. Right, he wants to see him surf. He says it's an honor to meet you and all of that, right? Yeah. So, he orders his own soldiers to go surf. But the idea is that Sam Bottoms would join him, and actually the other guys rescue him, right? So, kind of, that's the motivation. But you're right.
It's very funny.
It's very funny.
It's very, very funny, and there were genuine laughs. I don't think most of it was a very, very full audience. We should say this was at the Electric Cinema.
I would have said even sold out, really.
It wasn't quite so. I definitely, because I turned around right at the end, so unless people left, I saw a couple of empty seats, but extremely full. Yeah, as near as to sold out as sort of makes no difference. And I don't think the film was getting laughs all round. We were definitely laughing.
Well, I found those things as funny as you did, and also I was surprised. There were moments in the film where I was really startled. Like, where I reeled back from the image, right? Because either through horror or surprise or whatever. And that also surprised me.
Yeah, when they're on the boat going through the jungle, probably an hour and a half into the film, and it's all very quiet and calm and nothing's really happening, and then a shot comes from out of the background, out the jungle towards the camera, and you went, oh! In your way. Which was lovely.
So it was the film really worked on me. And I think seeing it this time, if anything, my appreciation of it is enhanced, right? All of the opening sequences, it's almost a model of what 1970s narrative cinema learned from the avant-garde, right? I mean, to see that kind of opening, which is all associative images, which is kind of symbolic, which is images melding onto each other. You have no clear sense of of space, really, or of time, yeah, kind of. I thought that was, it's kind of daring, so daring to begin a film, in that way, really.
It's not quite abstracted imagery. You know what you're looking at, but it's things like palm trees in silhouette, helicopter flying across, but it's like bits of imagery are taken and then faded on top of one another, and underneath it all is Martin Sheen lying upside down.
Yeah.
And it's I think it's kind of clear, or at least it was clear to me, this is his sort of, well, it's not clear exactly. It could be his memory, or it could be his imagination, or it could be his dream. And I think you kind of later look, once he wakes up in the hotel room, you get that this is him remembering.
He's got post-traumatic stress syndrome.
His
really.
Previous tour of Vietnam.
Yeah. So and so that kind of, and I think, just to use those techniques in a mainstream big budget Hollywood spectacular to begin that way is an indication of kind of what was possible in the 70s that really no longer, I don't know if it's no longer possible, but it's certainly no longer seen. So, that really struck me. What really struck me as well, I mean, this has to be one of the most beautiful films of all time, right? Like, the lighting, the cinematography, the symbolic use of light, the way that everything seems shot at either dusk or dawn, right? So there's a continuity of the imagery, but you have like these, this fantastic wide screen where you can see those gradations of light throughout, and then these bold choices of having like kind of key lighting, which, so only like a bit of a face is illuminated, right? So you go from one to the other. It's just absolutely beautiful. Like Vittorio Storaro, like, I mean, he's a genius. This is a great film, and it's not just like kind of pretty images, right? Kind of the full horror of war is evoked, and these kind of incredibly white shots where you see bodies dangling and limbs, and and on the other hand you have like the incredibly beautiful sunsets or the river, or it is really kind of an evocation of the sublime, of that which fills you with both awe and terror.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, basically, the shot. There's one shot early on, actually a couple, of napalm bombing runs, and a plane flies over, and the forest just ignites in a row of flame. God, it's terrifying, really.
Yes.
The way that a character will be bathed in silhouette, as you say, with maybe just one light, sort of from behind, illuminating the side of their face. We talk about great entrances recently. Marlon Brando's here. I mean, as you say, obviously he's got 2.5 hours of build up.
Yes.
It's like the third man, they just keep talking about this guy, and then he finally shows up out of the shadows, but nowhere near as quickly as Orson Welles does in The Third Man. I mean, he takes his time coming out of the shadows. You see the top of his head, you see just his nose, he kind of puts his face in his hands. It takes a long time to come out of the shadows. It's incredible, so engrossing.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And ostensibly it was all done because Marlon Brando had gotten so fat that they couldn't use his full body, right? Yeah, so they do have his full body when he's wearing in that pajamas, and actually creates a very striking image, a very striking silhouette with those pajamas, right?
Yeah.
And actually, when he walks out, the bottom, they're a bit bell bottomy, so it creates like this very fluid movement, really, which is very kind of striking to see. But it's used, I think that's the only full shot of, like, full body shot of him, and it's done, in silhouette, right? He's in darkness, really, so there's light behind him, which enshadows him.
It's like Jaws. Within Jaws, the shark was rubbish, so they couldn't shoot it very much because it looked terrible, and the film was much better because of it.
Well, let's not push the analogy, because Brando is great, so those few minutes he's on, it's incredibly effective, and he's given a great entrance. Actually, I think everybody in it is very effective. I mean, people talk about Harrison Ford. It's an early role for him, and he's not given anything particularly to do, so he doesn't make much of an impression. The impression on us now is just how young he was.
Yeah. Oh, there's Harrison Ford.
Yeah, kind of looking like a teenager, really, you know, and so slim.
Mind you, it's after Star Wars. Star Wars was 1977, and you know we remember him very well from that.
Yes,
So,
true. So
maybe we just forget it because he's, as you say, not in this very much. It's a small role.
it's a small role, but also the thing about Harrison Ford in Star Wars is, you know, he's meant to be funny, and also he's in constant motion. Whereas, you know, so you see his body in motion, and he's very, you know, there's a thing about action stars, like most of them move incredibly well. That's what makes them action stars. And this, you know, he's given here nothing to do except say a few bits of dialogue, right?
Yeah.
So it makes a different kind of impression. But what I was going to say is that for people of my generation, seeing people like, you know, Scott Glenn and Sam Bottoms, right, who's, you know, the lovely surfer who puts the arrow in his head, kind of who's stoned all the time, or Frederick Forrest, you know, it kind of evokes that whole era of cinema. These are all people who were about to be stars, who actually starred or were leading men in some key films, like, you know, The Rose and things like that, but who never quite made it, right? You know, so who haven't quite disappeared from view, but
they are stuck in that era, though, for you.
Yeah, for me they are. You know, I mean, that was kind of like the height of their fame and achievements, really. And speaking of that, I think it's worth saying, you know, just how extraordinary Coppola's career in the 70s is, because, you know, you have The Godfather, you have Godfather 2, you have The Conversation, and you have this, right? And that's just 4 masterpieces right there, right? Like, you know, 4 films that are amongst the greatest that kind of American cinema has ever produced, and that still continue to be seen and studied and thought about and re-released, right? So, you know, and kind of in dealing really with almost all aspects of kind of film form. So the conversation, you know, the use of sound in a conversation, for example, and so on, and really quite brilliant here as well, you know. So I remember, like, when the film was released, it was one of a spate of films dealing with the Vietnam War that were released around the same time. I think Coming Home maybe was 1978, but then there was The Deer Hunter, you know, maybe also around that time. The Deer Hunter might be 77, Coming Home 78, and this 79.
Deer Hunter 78.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So, you know, they came around the same time, and I remember actually because both The Deer Hunter and this film, they had like a special price. So I think if the normal ticket was $5 for, you know, a normal first release in a big cinema, these were $7. Yeah, so they were more expensive to go see than normal films. And part of the attraction of this was the helicopter sound. So I don't know whether it was a Dolby system that they had, but you know, the part of paying, of the advertisement for paying that price, is that they had a special sound system. So when you heard the helicopters, you heard them come from behind, right?
Yeah.
From the back of the cinema.
I'm seeing if I can find information from sort of personal knowledge. I think this was around the time that surround systems were starting to be developed.
Yeah. So look it up. Actually,
post-production and audio. This is on Wikipedia. Let's have a quick look. Walter Murch says, had problems trying to make a stereo soundtrack for Apocalypse Now because sound libraries had no stereo recordings of weapons. There's Dolby Stereo 6-track. Yeah, Dolby Stereo 70mm 6-track system for the 70mm release.
Yes.
This used 2 channels of sound from behind the audience as well as 3 of sound from behind the movie screen.
Yes.
The 35mm release used the new Dolby Stereo optical stereo system, but due to the limitations of the technology at the time, this 35mm release that played in the majority of theatres did not include any surround sound.
Well,
so 70mm surround sound.
I saw it on 70mm with surround sound, and because I still remember the startling effect of, you know, feeling like the helicopters coming from behind you, right, which was just amazing, really.
Yeah.
So you know, it's a film that uses like kind of full resources, and then it does, you know, such beautiful things with smoke and light and shadow So, those scenes where, there's a whole bunch of scenes that I think are just amazing. The scene with the bunnies, right? Yeah, the Go-Go Girls.
Right, the Playboy bunnies. Troops. I thought you meant rabbits.
No.
The Playboy bunnies.
Yeah, when you have the rockets, all the phallic rockets, and, kind of the women come to dance, and they all have guns, and then there's a loss of control. And you really get the sense of like these poor young boys, who've been like who are there to die and who are deprived any kind of intimacy, and then like it all bursts out in a flood of aggression, right, or of like desire as aggression. It's an incredible.
It's quite
scene.
striking that, and it's not foregrounded. It's not like close up or anything, but it's quite striking that there's barbed wire separating them from the stage.
Yes,
I noticed.
Yes,
like this sort of, they're there to be entertained and to be turned on by these girls, but there's this sort of kind of violent barrier.
And then the image, as the helicopter moves up, and everything looks hollowed out and empty, and it's like this sadness that kind of is conveyed by the image and the sound, right? Kind of as the helicopter leaves. I think that's beautiful. There are moments where Martin Sheen's face, it's like you see it comes into view, and then the darkness obscures it again, and then the fog comes in, and then like his face is revealed again. I thought all of that was like really beautiful.
It really struck me in the plantation scene where he gets together with the girl who lives there, the daughter, I guess, and she closes the sort of the translucent curtains around the four-poster bed that she puts him up in. And she takes her clothes off, and through the curtain he touches her and fondles her and touches her face. And so she becomes this, and she has been on the bed with him, so like, but through the curtain she becomes this ghost, dreamlike figure. I found that incredibly beautiful. Like the only way he really touches her, certainly once she's naked for him, is distanced. And I thought you would love that, because you love a bit of gauze and semi-transparent.
Well, I mean, it was. I mean, he is a genius with light, Vittorio Storaro. There's no other way. You see this film properly, and you can't help but notice that, right? Because it's not just that he's creating a pretty image; he's creating an expressive image, and one that narrates and contributes to the story, right? But he is doing it, or he and Coppola are doing it through the use of light. It's just absolutely beautiful. And actually, I think it must have been particularly difficult to maintain a constancy of that light from shot to shot.
Yeah.
Right. Because, the light creates a world in this film, and it's a consistent world, right? And so, kind of shooting exteriors and then interiors and then on the river and on the land. And
on location.
Yeah, and on location with a million things blowing up in the frame at each point, and yet to create that light, that effect of light and color, is just amazing to me.
And it's also expressive of Martin Sheen's character Willard. Because it's not so much foreshadowed as actually foregrounded throughout the film, a similarity between him and Kurtz.
Yes.
I mean, right, in fact, not even through lighting. Right at the very start, when you first see him at least after he's woken up, in that room in Saigon, and he just sort of goes a bit crazy, takes his clothes off, punches a mirror. This madness is sort of inherent in him right from the start. So it's not like, will he eventually turn into Kurtz? It's got him in it from the start.
Yes.
And they talk about with Kilgore, the what's his name character? I believe
the Robert Duvall.
Robert Duvall character. Thank you. They literally talk about him being insane on the beach, the way he behaves, and actually so insane that they kind of get away from him. But then in the voiceover, Willard says, how can Kurtz have gone insane? There's plenty of insanity to go around. But it's also then done through the lighting. So there's you get a lot of photographs in sort of dossiers of Kurtz, and they're photographs of Marlon Brando. But there's one in particular that he finds a little bit later, or he's sent a little bit later, which is of Kurtz completely in silhouette, and you don't see him at all. Like, it's what Kurtz looks like. What Kurtz looks like now, because all those previous photos are Kurtz from, when he was in the Air Force and all that sort of stuff. and this one is in silhouette and he's being lit from behind, and then I think it might be in that scene or maybe later a scene that quickly follows as the scene fades on Martin Sheen, fades to black, but it does so giving him that same halo, you know. So it does, and then right at the end, through the lighting, it turns them into the same people exactly, you know. And he ends up completely in silhouette at one point. In fact, it's quite. I thought it was fantastic, so bold that when he's infiltrating the temple right at the end to assassinate Kurtz, you see him from this low angle. A lot of low angles in the film, making people look very powerful and all the rest. You see him from this low angle stalking through the temple, and he's well lit. And then you cut to Kurt, who is kind of typing away, and he turns around and notices him. And what Kurt sees, he is completely in silhouette when you come back to Martin Sheen. You know, so the same background, but now no light at the front to show him what he's completely silhouetted.
Yes.
What a fantastic, bold decision, and an incredible visual.
Yeah.
You know.
It's so beautiful. And then I think thematically, you know, the film is also beautifully structured. So obviously, you know, they start off on this mission and you see all the interplay between the characters and, you know, you see their interrelationships. And, you know, as the film, as they go upriver on the boat from Vietnam towards Cambodia, the horror begins to be overlaid. So, you know, the initial thing that you see is really all of this helicopters bombing what turns out to be a school, right? And you get the full sense of horror of the teachers, you know, trying to hide the children and, you know, all these innocent people kind of getting killed. Then there's the incident with the puppy in the boat, right? Where, you know, kind of, they're all going crazy, right? They're all about to snap. And that's why kind of, you know, they do things like that. Kind of, they're so afraid that they overreact, right? So that scene of killing all the people on the boat is shown to be like almost like an accident, yeah?
Well, it's Lawrence Fishburne's character, Lance, I think his name is, who he's on the machine gun and out of nervousness.
Yes.
Because everyone just starts yapping at each other, but they're not sort of getting fighty, but he just out of nervousness shoots everyone, and then just doesn't stop. I mean, very, very quickly he has got them all down, and he just shoots and shoots until he's out of bullets.
Yeah.
You know, and it's very clear he's out of bullets, and he slams the thing shut, and it's like, yeah, I'm good, but he's not good.
Yeah, well, he just killed, like, you know, 20 people or whatever. So the horror keeps progressing and getting worse and worse, you know, as they go up the river. And then it takes a while for them to be personally affected, you know, so it takes a while for the Lawrence Fishburne character to be killed, you know, and then the captain of
Chief.
the captain of the boat, and eventually the Forrest Tucker character, who's a chef from New Orleans.
Not Forrest Tucker. What's his name? Something Forrest. I forget.
Frederick Forrest.
Frederick Forrest. Yeah. He's called chef.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, they finally begin to be affected until that moment, which is just so incredibly visually dazzling, where they arrive at Kurtz's camp, or whatever you call it, right? And they're like victims of torture, hanging from trees over the water, and bodies and limbs and
heads displayed.
You know, and then that's when Dennis Hopper appears, you know. And actually, in the first sequences he's in, I thought, oh my god, this is much better than I remember him, because, you know, you remember Dennis Hopper in those scenes being Dennis Hopper, which is, you know, being high and speaking too fast and, yeah, kind of a man, right? You know, those kinds of things. But actually, I found him surprisingly effective. You know, I don't know if my memory is wrong, or if it had a different effect on me when I was younger. But I thought he was surprisingly effective in the earlier scenes. And then some of those scenes which were shot through the bamboo, right? Like,
in the little jail cell.
Yeah, I thought those were, you know, that was also kind of little mini lessons in acting. Because, you know, there's no possibility of movement within that tight kind of framing through the bamboo, right? So I thought kind of, that was he jars a bit, but he brings a burst of energy, I think, right, and kind of becomes part of a different kind of craziness around what you are seeing.
Is the film doing a sort of Manson thing? Not with him exactly, but the film brings up Manson briefly at one point.
Yes.
It shows a newspaper, his that famous photo of Manson on the cover, and this is so the Tate murders. You see the headline, and when you get to Kurtz's camp, he's a god. They talk about these are his children, and Manson had a family, and I mean that is obviously that's a huge stretch, but there's also the Dennis Hopper character kind of embodying that certain kind of hippie spirit, and this guy's a genius man, and you should listen to his teachings. So it's not this, I'm not saying that they are making Kurtz into Charles Manson. I'm not saying that with any real degree of sort of gravity, but is it building on that idea slightly, do you think?
Well, more than slightly, and I think it does so in different ways. So, I mean, I agree with what you say. So you are meant to see Kurtz as a similar kind of charismatic,
crazy person.
At least for a moment, right? Because I think the character is much more complex than that. But I think what you're also meant to be thinking is, here is this person who's condemned, in America, and who in fact, my understanding is that he hadn't personally killed anybody. Whereas each of the men that you've just seen, right, has just killed like 30 people, and some of them completely unethically. They weren't in danger, it was an accident, or they were just nervous, or right, like
after that thingy shooting, when Lawrence Fishburne shoots those people, Martin Sheen finishes off the woman in cold blood.
That's right. So basically, the state is making these very, very young men, young and vulnerable, and what's lovely about the film is you get all of the views. Like, so the chef is in love with this, with this woman back home and trying to maintain a relationship with her, and really doesn't want to be there, right? The Lawrence Fishburne character, he gets a tape from his mom where, she's talking about how they're going to buy him a car, and they're all saving up, and they all kind of really, and you get a sense of what their lives are elsewhere, right? So they're forced to be there. They've been drafted, right? And they've been turned into killers. So everything that American culture condemns in its citizens is what it turns its citizens into when it drafts them into soldiers. So I think that's also part of, kind of the way that image of Manson refracts. So it's not just on Kurtz or Willard. It's also on all of the other kids.
What a great reading. I was just bringing it up because I noticed it.
Oh, well, we might be wrong, but anyway, that's the way it struck me. It did have that effect. I think it's very kind of deliberately deployed,
I have problems, though, and we've talked a lot about what we like, and particularly the way it's shot, and the way it feels, I suppose. I mean, I think it's incredible visual filmmaking, audio-visual filmmaking. I think we can agree on that, and it's beautiful. But is it sort of too beautiful? So what kind of struck me?
No.
What kind of struck me? What I was thinking about is it's the kind of film where you say we want to show the horrors of war. No one ever shows the horrors of war, and and you do get these things where you have the Vietnamese characters. I say characters. They're not people with lines or names or anything like that, who kind of run in on conversations between American generals and so on and so forth on the beach, carrying an injured child, something like that. And you just see them at the edges. And obviously, you have the thing about the school being destroyed. But again, there is also a feeling of the, I don't want to say the nobility of the cause exactly, but of the nobility of the men.
Well,
so like I say, those low angles that you see throughout make people powerful.
Yeah.
And make them inspiring to look at.
I think this is part of the reason why the film is great, right? Because it's so sympathetic to the poor individuals who were drafted and who have been turned into killing machines. Yeah, it never dehumanizes those people. Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
But it's constantly critiquing the sadness, the futility, the horror of the war itself.
I think it makes it attractive.
I do not.
Not to me exactly, but I think it conveys a certain feeling of like they want. So take Willard for example. Willard has been in Vietnam once before. He's done one tour, and although he is kind of reeling from those memories of it, it's not entirely clear that you say it's PTSD, and I'm sure it probably is to some degree, and you can certainly see it that way. But there's also a sense in which he wants to get back there. He talks about the only words I said to my wife in years were, "Yes, I'll give you a divorce." He says right at the start. I mean, that's not the exact line, but that's basically what he says.
Well,
he leaves his wife to go back to the jungle. He wants to return there.
No,
and actually, does he have
That's not my sense at all.
Does he have an aim? Does he have a goal? You know, what he does when he gets there, he says he's waiting for this mission. He hates being cooped up in that room at the start. He needs to get back into the jungle. It's not enough to be in Saigon. He needs to be in the fight again. And then when his assignment comes, he says something
That's not
like...
my reading of it at
Well,
all.
when his assignment comes, he says something like, you know, what else was I going to do? I might as well do it. Which is to say, like, so who is he? What does he want?
No, so that's the key thing. What else am I going to do? Because the thing is, you're introduced to him in the middle of this nightmare. He's stoned out of his gills, right? He's kind of doing these kung fu moves in the mirror. His body looks all bent out of shape and, you know, semi-destroyed. When the military police goes in, he thinks they've come to arrest him, right? Whereas in fact they've come with a mission for him that he can't refuse. And so what else is he meant to do, right? So that's, I think, what else am I meant to do? He's somebody who's, you know, suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome and who's got no place to go.
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. But there is a sense in which, you know, everyone else is not a character. And the thing is, it's clearly a film about war. Is it a film about the Vietnam War, really? It's set in Vietnam, just.
No, I think it's very much about the Vietnam War. It's about war in general, but the Vietnam War in particular, of course. You know, and that's where I think...
Is it set in a recognisable Vietnam? You know,
I wouldn't know
the point
that, right?
is,
it was shot in Philippines, you know, so...
The thing is,
whether the Philippines looks like Vietnam...
It shows Vietnam to be, I think, rather like the Conrad novel it's based on. It's a land of savages, you know. I mean, you have the scene where they're throwing spears.
Well,
and the captain, the chief of the, his name is Chief, captain of the boat, gets killed with a spear. Were they using spears in the Vietnam War? No, it's ridiculous to say so.
No. I mean,
that's a scene from the novel.
But you're ignoring all of the projection, right? So in fact, the first thing that you see is, you know, what looks like a very civilized school, you know, with very well-dressed teachers and very well-dressed children, and that's, you know, where the Air Force goes in and bombs it all at the very beginning. So it's true that the further up they go, the more they go into a wilderness that is both external and internal, right? And so, you know, kind of, and then you're meant to go into Cambodia, right? So, you know, now kind of were there primitive people, you know, native peoples in Cambodia like that? I mean, I don't know, you know. So,
I was talking about before Cambodia, to tell the truth. I was talking about in Vietnam. It strikes me as a very unrealistic depiction of Vietnam.
Look, you know, it's obviously a dream imaginary of Vietnam. But nonetheless, the fact that it's Vietnam is clear. That's the whole point of the sections with the French people.
Well, again, the French people, what they have to say, the guy who runs the place, I don't know his name, but the guy who kind of gives a kind of oral history of Vietnam, and he talks about Vietnam being started by the French, as if it hadn't existed for 1,000 years before that.
No, but the point is, you know, they had colonized it. They had been in a war in Vietnam. They lost it. Right, you know, so there's kind of all of these analogies being made, you know, with what, you know, the French did there and how they were defeated and what the Americans are doing there, but obviously on a much larger industrial scale because they have different technologies of guns and helicopters and rockets and things like that.
Well, that's also not entirely accurate, though. The French were colonists. The Americans weren't there to colonize; they were there ideologically.
No, but they fought the French fought the war, and the Americans took over from the French in terms of the Viet Cong. So it is specifically about Vietnam. It's not about somewhere else, and that's what all those sequences are about. And actually, it tells you some of the history. Kind of how the military in Vietnam was kind of disabused and dispirited because now they were getting kind of messages from munitions factory with like free the Viet Cong and so on and so forth. So it's not about somewhere else. It's not about Japan.
No, it's not about somewhere else. But it's
about Vietnam.
To the extent that it's set in Vietnam, but in its determination to take the novel and set it in Vietnam, it turns Vietnam into this dark continent that I don't think it was, and I think is unrealistic.
Well, the war that Americans fought is dark, and that's kind of why that's being used for. I mean, you could make other analogies. In some ways, it's also an imperial narrative. And so is the Vietnam War. America had no business being there, right? But this is not about, whether America had any business of being there or not. It's about the futility of that war, and what it does to people and how it victimizes, and the craziness of it and so on. So, and about how and about the horror. So it's about all of those things, but its effects on America and Americans, that's just a given,
No, I know, but I've still got a point.
Yes, well, point taken.
And what happened? What about right at the end when he's killed? Colonel Kurt supposedly is become like a god to these people. This is in Cambodia now, so I'm not talking about Vietnam exactly, but these people who are kind of painted up like these savages, these tribal people, and Willard kills Kurtz and emerges, and they are all too ready to lay down their weapons in front of him and worship him instead. But again, that's like the.
I mean, to me, that also has a kind of a logic. You kill the leader, you become the leader, and the thing is that he goes away. I mean, if you wanted to make the film banal, then you would have had him just replace Kurtz, right? Which there is an analogy made between them, and he could easily have done. Right, kind of. I think that's what that scene is about. But no, he leaves.
Yeah, but to me, it's about who those people are, why they behave that way. It's the guy in charge is kind of above all. I don't know. It just rubbed me the wrong way. I think it is banal. I mean, it could be banal doing it that way. Well, I think it's banal the way they do it.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I disagree.
And again, you do end up with this thing of who is Willard underneath. He's just an agent of the state,
But no, you don't get a sense that he's just an agent of the state. You get a sense that he's kind of as disturbed a person and as lonely and alienated and as anybody else in the film. And actually, what you see is how the war affects kind of people differently, and they're all on edge, except admittedly him. Yeah, Willard, you never see him go completely mad.
No. I wasn't going to say word. I was going to say mad. I was going to say sort of out of control. He doesn't ever seem to be out of control. Because I was going to when you said he's the only one who doesn't, I was going to mention Kilgore, the crazy general at the start, who is clearly kind of mad.
Yes.
But also is totally in control of himself. Knows exactly what he wants.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes,
I mean, he's like a sort of Dr. Strangelove type character, isn't he?
He is a bit. Maybe more than a bit, actually, but I don't know. So the thing is, that everybody ends up being destroyed by this war in this film, in different ways, and the only two who survive are Johnson the surfer, and it's his innocence, I think, really that preserves him. I mean, there's that wonderful scene where they're throwing arrows and he catches one, and he makes his hat out of it, like, kind of not really focusing on that they might kill him, right? Yeah. So
and he becomes a participant and sort of amongst the all those sort of tribal people at the end.
Yeah, and he kind of
he has to be dragged out. Actually, he doesn't go with Willard has to take him by the hand and take him.
That's right. So he's the one who looks after the puppy, who holds the arrow, who's good with the children in the end, right? So you get a sense that he's managed to maintain his innocence really, in a way that kind of no one else has, and that maybe that's why he's alive. This is a film with depths that we haven't begun to explore. So there's stuff about what the war does to all these kids. There's stuff about what they've left behind. There's stuff about them not even knowing what they're doing or who they're killing or why. There's a moral things that are kind of rendered complicated. So, that bit when Lawrence Fishburne is so nervous that he ends up shooting at everybody, do you see him as a killer? Do you see him as an unethical, immoral person? Or is it just a nervous kid? And if he's just a nervous kid, he's nonetheless killed 30 other people whose lives also matter. So I think the film dramatizes these incredibly complex, ethical and moral problems. So I would not say it's banal.
I didn't say it's all banal, I just meant at the end.
Oh, right, well.
No, I was just talking about the end that you brought up, as there could have been a banal way to do it. Anyway.
I mean, I think it's one of those films, the more I see it, just the greater I think it is. And I have to digest it, actually, because, one of the things is, we're talking about these images, and I think actually kind of, you experience them bodily or physically, but the full significance of them, I think, it's almost like I need more time to kind of process it. So for example, that play of light on Willard's face, kind of, that I just thought it was so beautiful and so poetic, and, he's there and he's not there, and he's illuminated, but, the fog and the things kind of hide him, kind of, it's kind of, I think there's greater significance to all of that than I can articulate at the moment.
It's a very pretty movie.
It's more than pretty.
Yeah, but it's mainly pretty. It's beautiful. It's stunningly beautiful by any standards.
Yes.
And that is kind of the most striking thing about it to me. Which is not to say that it's not striking in other ways, but that is the thing that will stick in my mind.
Well, you'll remember those.
The compositions and the colours and the shapes and all of that.
I saw it 40 years ago, and some of the images I've carried all my life. So, you can't say that about many films. And actually, I think this time around also, the evocation of war and all its craziness and horror and so on. This is just gobsmackingly great. Those things with Kilgore,
yeah, what a name.
Where there are helicopters flying, and there's cows being raised to the sky, and there's bombs being dropped a foot from him, and he doesn't move an inch, and he's shouting orders and cracking jokes, right? And people are surfing. You get that whole sense of the madness and the danger and the destruction, of the war, all kind of happening within one shot. It's just amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, if you get a chance to see it, do.
Seems to be doing the rounds. Well, yes. Actually, I suppose it must be doing the rounds because it's
is doing the rounds.
New release.
I didn't catch it because, and this is... it was playing in Bologna in the Piazza Maggiore because this is a restored version. And I missed seeing it on a really huge screen, which I now can kick myself for not having done it, It's it's one of those films that you say, oh, there's so much playing at Bologna that, you take and this would come around, so you take the opportunity of seeing it elsewhere, but then you forget that you're not going to see it in the same conditions. And I would have loved to have seen it on that huge, Piazza Maggiore screen that they have in Bologna.
It did have IMAX screenings in August.
Yeah,
that would have been amazing. I think it because this restoration is taken from the original negative at 4K.
Yes,
which is why it looks so incredible.
Yes,
imagine what it would look like on that massive screen. I remember when we saw Lawrence of Arabia on the big IMAX screen, the proper IMAX screen that Birmingham used to have.
Yeah, in Millennium Point.
It was incredible, and it actually made me think of Lawrence of Arabia as well. As I mentioned to you partway through the film, the thing about screen direction in Lawrence of Arabia. It's left to right, always left to right until they go back, and then it's right to left. And in this, it struck me that so often when you see the boats going down the river, it's a right to left direction, and it's not opposed to anything. It's not like they then go left to right, and it's not consistent either. I think there are times when it's not, but it just struck me that is kind of the dominant thing. It's like right to left reads as going backwards, going into darkness or whatever in this,
Yeah, it's also interesting. There's a progression of light, because the further up they go, and the closer they get, the darker and darker that the film becomes. Just in terms of intensity of light, until you get to those scenes with Kurtz, where the film is almost dark, except maybe for a sliver of his bald head, or his fingers, or it picks out almost parts of his body, but everything is kind of in the dark until then his face is revealed, and so those scenes are the darkest in the whole film, literally, as well as psychologically and so on, and
in all sorts of clever ways. It's a film. I'm glad I saw it, and I think some of my criticisms, they're not without foundation, but I think they apply just more generally to American film about Vietnam as a whole.
There's a whole history of that. I mean, the only film, maybe the only film that had any impact about the Vietnam War until the spate of films in the late 70s was the John Wayne film. What's it called? Where you can imagine John Wayne winning the Vietnam War.
The Green Berets.
Yes, the Green Berets, right? And so it's a thing that American cinema basically couldn't cope with, right? And then kind of but again, Coming Home is about the effects on veterans who come home, and they have no limbs. The Deer Hunters, but again, it's an effect on Americans. Then later on, you'll have Born on the 4th of July, which is about a particular person who came back in a wheelchair and the effects on him. I think, in fact, he was the spur of Coming Home. Then there's the Brian De Palma film with Charlie, was it something of Casualties of War? And then there's the Oliver Reed film with Charlie Sheen, right? So then into the 80s, that period from about 1978 till about 1986, you have a whole spate of Vietnam War films. And actually, I don't think any of them is
Oliver
as great
Reed.
as this one.
Oliver Stone.
Oliver Stone, sorry.
Platoon, wasn't it?
Platoon, that's right.
Yeah. I was looking at it going, Oliver Reed did a Vietnam film.
Sorry, my mind wanders sometimes. Yeah. Oliver Stone. So, and I think for me, and they all deal with Americans, obviously. But to me, this is the greatest.
Yeah, I suppose it's the first time it's ever really occurred to me, and I think it's because of the adherence as well to the novel, which was had this thing about savages.
Yes.
That the film adheres so closely to that, and then I was going, but this does not add up with what Vietnam was like, and that made me think more sort of widely, I think, about it. But I mean, we notice it in the same way when American movies do things about World War II, and but you're noticing World War II when
actually the Brits are no better.
Well, I was going to again get on to say
we won the war single-handedly.
I was going to go on to say that we do it as well. But, it always just got me in Saving Private Ryan at the end when it's American flag at the end. It's like, I like this movie. Don't make me hate it right in the last frame.
Well, I know. Anyway, highly, highly recommend that you see it on a big screen in as good a version as you can and with as good a sound system as you can. The sound is spectacular in this film. And some of the images, I mean, as I said, I saw it 40 years ago, and some of the images have stayed with me for 40 years. And actually kind of seeing it again now, I think it's even more beautiful than I remembered it being.
I liked it a lot. And, it's really, really good experience. And I liked it.
Alrighty.
That's as simple as I can sum it up.
Alright, well, thank you very much for listening. We're eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
iTunes, SoundCloud and YouTube to listen to us. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter. at Eavesdrop Movies, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye.